Well, a very good afternoon and welcome to another edition of KTN Business Today. As we start off the week, we have quite a lot lined up for you this afternoon. We'll be talking about the recent summit, that is the Land Summit, where there was a lot of discussions around making it possible for easing the business environment, especially when it comes to land registration. Also on the program, my colleague Joy Doreen Bira has an interesting interview about digital marketing, and she's actually standing by with her guest. Joy, what do you have for us?
Well, Abby, digital marketing is just a part of it, but the bigger conversation is going to be on the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure you've heard about the first three revolutions, so we're going to have a conversation on the fourth industrial revolution, and of course a lot more that is coming up regarding road tolls in the country today, and I'm sure we're going to have that conversation as well, Abby. Well, there's that and a whole lot more on climate change. The Marrakesh COP22 is ongoing. It's meant to end on the 18th of November. So that and more coming up on Business Today. Abby.
Well, interesting there, Joy. Of course, we also have an interesting discussion coming up where we'll be looking at Kenya is set to host the second high-level conference, and we'll be speaking to the Director for Resource Mobilization, who is in studio with us also this afternoon. That is Jackson Kinyanjui. We'll be speaking to him shortly, as well as the Director General for the Kenya National Highways Authority, that is KENHA. But first, let's start you off with our Twitter poll question. And today we are asking you a very straightforward question, and it's basically it's really on, is Kenya ready to have toll stations? Is Kenya ready for toll stations? And you can send in your feedback using our Twitter handle at KT News, or you can tweet us using at Joy Doreen Bira, or you can tweet me at Agina Abi, and we'll be able to sample some of your views as we move along. Well, let's get you down to some of the recent developments from the business world. And Lands Cabinet Secretary Professor Jacob Kaimenyi says the government is on track in dishing out land titles countrywide. He says that the exercise will continue until the Jubilee administration pledges for the issuance of title deeds is realized. He was speaking this morning during the State House Summit on land.
With regard to registration and issuance of title deeds countrywide, as at June 2013, since independence, we had processed 5.6 million title deeds. But for the last almost 3 years, we have been able to process over 2.4 million title deeds at a cost of 4.46 billion shillings. And when you look at the development of land information management system, again, before 2013, June, we didn't have one really. And what you have done in collaboration with the National Land Commission, we have been able to come up with a land information management system, popularly referred to as NLIMS, and indeed launched it, and is being piloted with the eventual intention of applying it nationally. Again, we have initiated the digitization of 13 land registries at a cost of 1.2 billion shillings, out of which, ladies and gentlemen, we have been able to automate land registration transactions and online searches through e-citizen portal for Nairobi registry, which is complete, making Kenya become one of the 10 top global improvers in ease of doing business.
And that's the Lands Cabinet Secretary, Professor Jacob Kaimenyi. Away from that, governments meeting in Morocco are expected to produce action plans on how to implement the 2015 Paris Agreement to slow global warming. And one of them is the need to develop Africa, a continent that continues to pay the price for the industries of developed nations. Here now is KTN's Ashley Mazuri reporting on how African countries will be electrified despite the funding and technical challenges behind the implementation.
Representatives from almost 200 nations have assembled in Marrakesh, Morocco, for the 22nd edition of the Climate Change Conference of the Parties, which has been dubbed Africa's COP. According to President of last year's COP21 and French Environment Minister, Mr. Royal, the time has come for climate justice for Africa.
In particular, climate justice for Africa. That is the big challenge ahead of COP22. COP22 is an African COP. That is where our priorities lie. That is where our hope lies.
COP22 is considered a continuation of the Paris Agreement, which won swift backing last December from almost 200 countries, including China, the United States, and the European Union, and has been described as the most complex global treaty since the Marrakesh Trade Agreement signed in 1994. It seeks to win the world economy of fossil fuels in the second half of the century, limiting the rise in average world temperatures to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. Negotiators this year will also be trying to find ways to raise finances to help developing nations cut their rising emissions and adapt to the effects of climate change.
I hope that Africa will benefit for this COP. First thing, we have made many pledges in Paris. Many parties and countries made announcements in Paris, like the $10 billion to electrify Africa. Here, we need to know what happened since Paris and now. Did we effectively implement project or allocated this money? We need to know that we are moving to help Africa and all the most vulnerable countries.
The immediate challenge for negotiators this year is that by law, countries that have ratified the deal must start agreeing the rules to implement it at the next UN climate conference. The Morocco meeting is due to start writing a detailed rulebook for the Paris Agreement, likely to take 2 years, and find ways to act. COP22 aims to tackle agricultural, food security, energy, water and health issues. According to the private sector, finance remains a key issue.
What's good to do is to help the little company in Africa, because what we've seen is international company who come in Africa country and say, we are coming here to help you, but we are already in place. So what we want is international institution can help small company to grow up, to have the knowledge, to improve and to access to high financement.
An African pavilion has been set up at the conference to help connect NGOs, banks, activists and civil societies together, and is expected to serve as a space to hold debates, exchange ideas and information while also discussing strategies. Ashley Mazuri, KTN News.
Many thanks there, Ashley. And still on COP22 in Morocco, ongoing talks are now working to help cap greenhouse gases in a bid to help African nations like Uganda cope with global warming. And now the cattle corridor in central Uganda is on the front line of the nation's battle against climate change, which is threatening the livelihoods of many.
Residents of Nakaseke district in central Uganda know too well the effects of climate change. It is affecting agriculture, which has been the lifeline of many here. Even livestock farming, which is considered less risky than crop farming, has not been spared. Lack of water and pastures has made it a difficult venture.
Our animals have to walk long distances to find water, and most of the cows end up dying. The pasture dries up and we end up with areas that have no vegetation at all.
Agriculture in the region is largely rain-fed, therefore dependent on changing patterns. Lack of rainfall, record temperatures and worsening weather extremes are already putting many people at risk, development experts say. A climate change initiative in Uganda is now educating locals in their farmer field schools, teaching them to grow drought-resistant fodder so that they can continue to feed their cattle during dry seasons. Farmers are encouraged to harvest rainwater and store it in order to have enough for their cattle and to irrigate their crops. This initiative is already running in 6 of the over 100 districts in the country. 80% of Uganda's population relies on agriculture for its livelihood. Planning for climate change is essential to ensure food security, but not much planning has been done, though this initiative is a good start.
Agriculture food security is a matter of life and death in Uganda. It's about survival of humanity.
The ongoing UN Climate Change Conference COP22 talks aim to curb greenhouse gases, help African nations cope with global warming, and raise climate finance for developing nations to a goal of $100 billion a year by 2020.
Well, interesting developments around climate change. Let's see how that goes in the coming days. And we now just want to get into this conversation in a deeper perspective, and we should be having an interesting Super Bowl coming up on our screen here that sort of shows us the direction to which global industrial revolutions are taking. Well, Joy, this is an interesting graphics when it comes to looking at the numbers, really. Perhaps from your end, what stood out when it comes to industrial revolution?
Well, I mean, there's quite a lot that you can talk about when it comes to Industrial Revolution. It dates as far back as the 18th century. So as early as the 1870s, we were seeing quite a bit when it came to industrial revolutions. The process began in Britain, actually, in the 18th century, like I said, about 1860. And if you are to follow that transition, the very first one had everything to do with information, where we saw water, mechanical production, equipment, and steam that were being revolutionized. And we did see a lot of mechanization during the 18th century as well. And then that was 1784. So there's quite a lot that you can talk about when it comes to the Industrial Revolution, Abby. Yeah.
Well, take it away. Let's talk matters digital marketing now.